careful of that. All right, good evening. As the chair for the Measure S committee, I'll call this meeting to order. Does that work? Okay. May we have a roll call, please?
Committee Member O'Rourke. Here. Committee Member Crump-Shears. Here. Committee Member Moffitt. Here. Committee Member Savano.
Here. All right, next we're on to the organization and orientation. We'll move now, maybe we have a staff report, please, on that orientation.
Yeah, so I'll keep this really quick because we actually this year we consolidated a lot of that information into item 4.1, which is the resolution that formed the originally Measure G committee, now Measure S. So the information is there, as well as the method of rotation for the chair and vice chair, which you all saw in the packet. So it just follows the council rotation by the appointees. So whoever's appointed by the mayor serves as the chair here, vice mayor, so forth. So in each year it would move like the council. Also included in 4.1, just to point out, the Brown Act rules are in there in case there was any question about how these public meetings are run. And then lastly, I'll just say that there was there also is some additional information in the packet on some of the council meeting information leading up to the budget for 21-22. So strategic objectives, that's where the council had landed on, as well as links to the goals for each department and the budget, the section of the budget document referenced is the one that talks about all the projects and the programs that were planned for the year. So that's item 2 and part of 4.1.
Thank you. And I think it's also important to note that the same committee members that were seated and here for this meeting last year, where we got that same information in terms of the history, which no one knew on the committee per se. So
right.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Are there any questions or comments on section 2 from the committee? Okay. We'll move on to the next item, which is public comment. Next, I'd like to open the meeting for public comment. If there are members of the public who would like to make a comment at this time, now we will check to see if there's anyone on Zoom who wishes to make public comment as well. Not seeing anyone here in the meeting room.
Thank you, Chair Savano. Members of the Zoom audience, if you would like to make a public comment, please use the raise hand icon at this time. And Chair Savano, that'll end public comment.
Thank you. Next, we'll move into the regular agenda. Our first item of business is the Measure S Committee, Oversight Committee background. And may we have a staff report on that as well.
Yes, thanks, Chair, members of the committee. So I went over a lot of this already, but I will just drill into a little bit more detail on a couple key things. So strategic objectives, which is every year the council goes through a strategic planning process prior to doing the budget, creating the budget, and then ultimately adopting the budget. One of the main changes in this year's for 21-22 strategic objectives that was new was the last item on there on packet page 4, which is promote an equitable, compassionate, and healthy community that honors diversity as a source of strength. So that was a new objective that the council created in strategic planning. And that as well as some of the other objectives led to some of the key initiatives that really got off the ground in this year that we'll talk a little bit more about. The most visible being the SAFE team, the Specialized Assistance for Everyone. Thank you, Petaluma, for that acronym. Anyway, so it's the Mobile Mental Health Crisis Response Team. And yeah, and we also had an ad hoc committee of the council that were looking at a lot of different things in terms of city operations and community kind of things that we could do to sort of better, better include, everyone in what we do and how we plan. So I'd be happy to answer more specific questions, but that's basically how we ended up with the 21-22 budget that we'll talk about in a minute in the next item.
Great. Any questions or comments on that item? Seeing none. Let's see. Are there any members of the public who would like to make a comment at this time? And then we'll check the Zoom audience. Not seeing anyone still in the council chambers.
At this time, we have no Zoom attendees as well, so that'll end public comment.
Thank you. We'll move on to the second item now, the Measure S Annual Report for fiscal year 2021-2022. And could we please have a staff report on that?
Absolutely. Good evening, chair members, members of our community online, possibly in the future listening to this. This evening we'll be going over the summary of Measure S funds for the city, which cover the fiscal year 2021-2022, and our fiscal year is from July to June. Turn this on. So for this overview, we want to go over a summary of what is Measure S, a snapshot of the funds that we received, then that detail on how we use the budget to address how we were strategically going to use these funds and the allocation by their function, and then concluding with the financial audit and the summary of those uses found by the audit. So what is Measure S and why does the city have it? So Measure S represents a voter-approved 1% add-on sales tax that was passed in November 2020 by almost 75% approval rating of the public. The Measure S was primarily an extension of the already existing Measure G, which then the Measure G was a replacement of the 0.5% tax from Measure A. So this has been a continuing desire of our community to have this add-on sales tax to stay here in our community. And it continues to show the approval rating, and we also want to show what detail was provided to the public, so we include the voter pamphlet within our Measure S report now, as is presented to you today. So this 1% tax, though it sounds like a lot, it contributes almost 25% of the city's general fund revenues, and is just one piece of the sales tax that is applied to only taxable purchases within the city. So of course there are also services and items that are not subject to tax, and so we do not get those fundings for those. But for those that are subject to this tax, 6% is dedicated, goes right back to the state. 0.25% goes to the county transportation tax, which is dedicated by the state. There's a 1% Bradley Burns, which we do receive, so again that kind of matches our one-on-one and makes up a combined total of about 50% of our general fund revenues for the city. And the remaining are special additional other add-on taxes that were passed by similarly to Measure S, and they include Smart Train Measure Q, Open Space Measure S, and multiple others, which then come up to a total city tax as of the time of this Measure S for this fiscal year was 9.5%. So as presented herein, this measure tax revenues brought in has continued to increase over prior years, with a total for fiscal year 2021-2022 of almost $3.2 million, an increase of approximately $227,000 or 7% over the prior year. And on a quarterly basis, when you're looking at budgetary funds, sometimes a quarterly, it's approximately $56,000 on average that we're getting more per quarter this fiscal year in discussion than the prior fiscal year. So as mentioned previously, not all sales are taxable, but what our current tax base is made up is primarily due to the construction industry, food and drug industry, vehicles, and fuel and service stations. There's also a big significant portion that is from the pooled tax, which is from other transactions that all get pooled together and then redistributed based on the percentage of sales. So for 2022-23, which we just had a mid-year budget evaluation report for council on February 14th, we anticipate sales tax for the next year to have a small decline compared to the year that we're looking at right now. So our current budget year that we're working in, we are anticipating a small decline. So how are those revenues spent? Consistent with our budget practice, we have funds separated by type, which is by operating and capital. So we have those different functions that we use for expenditures. For the current fiscal year, because of the 5-year capital improvement plan, we were able to use almost 49% of the Measure S funds to support our city improvements, and even secure some grant matching funds, like for our Quick Strike project, which we'll discuss when we get into the detailed projects. Overall, we do try to balance the allocation of funding between the operations and capital. Another way that we break down our budget, and again for Measure S, is by departments or function. And for the purpose of Measure S, we really call these programs. So for the measure, there's 5 major programs that this was generated to support, and those are made up of the Public Safety Program, Streets, Sidewalks, and Storm Drains, Parks, Public Buildings, and the Recreation Department. Note that the chart just represents the total percentage per program for allocation in that year. So just because a percentage might be decreasing doesn't mean the dollars are decreasing. It's just on a percentage basis it's changing. And so there's a better depiction of the allocation by dollars at packet page 100, which you can see kind of the allocation of the dollars per year for that. So now getting down into the nitty-gritty detail of the dollars spent and what projects, programs these were spent on. So for public safety for the fiscal year, and again, along the lines of our strategic objectives, as Damien brought up, this year there was $1,020,889 that was expended in this category, where it was used to implement a significant portion of it was for the SAFE team, to preserve our operations, including dispatch and traffic safety, replacing a vehicle with the city's first all-electric patrol vehicle, and also include enhanced safety projects, which are the listed herein in the presentation, the sidewalk or the crossing at Benson Lane, the signal controllers along Old Redwood Highway and Valparaiso, advanced video detection cameras for vehicles and bicycles, which is we're still continuing to work on now, as well as a significant piece was the local road safety plan and completing the hazard mitigation plan. Maybe we'll jump to the next slide and we'll see how it works. So next was the streets. There was a total of $1.3 million approximately used, both again for a combination of operations, like our full-time engineer, as well as a significant amount of capital projects, which were made up of the 2022 annual street maintenance, paving and striping program, the design and pre-construction of the 2023 slurry seal and sidewalk improvement projects, design on the 2021 street construction improvement projects, which was the big significant portion of all happened along the west side of Cotati, and continued and design and coordination with the state program for the 2020 street construction improvement. This is our Quick Strike project, which is going to be happening pretty soon. So because we had Measure S, we were able to get some Caltrans matching grant funds for that. And then we're going to continue to roll out the gateway signage and updates to our wayfinding signage. So that was another part of the program that was continued with these funds. Next we have Park and Landscape, which was just under $200,000, and it funded ongoing operations, including the cost of a full-time maintenance worker, some ongoing pieces of the design work for the playground at Cotati Park, which is now under construction out there, funding and operation maintenance pieces, just little pieces of it for the Rhonda Folletti Ranch, continued maintenance of the parks and clearing vegetation, and continuing those creek cleanups. Next is the public building program, which is approximately $310,000. It was primarily used for operations and maintenance of these city buildings, which are made up of City Hall, the Civic Center, Police Department, Train Depot, as well as a Public Works Courtyard. Additionally, this measure helps cover some of the inspection and code enforcement contracts that we have as well as finished design for the window replacement project, which is currently also in construction right now. You'll see on the side of the City Hall, as well as finishing the construction on the re-roof at the Civic Center. Last but absolutely not least, and only possible because we have Measure S, what brought back was our recreation program. It continues to be fully funded by Measure S. This includes all the staff, which includes a manager, coordinator, and seasonal part-time staff, which run the camps and other programs that the recreation and facilities, so they manage also the facility rentals and everything else as well. They also help facilitate our social media and community outreach, so it's a big part of not just programming. Like right now they have the Easter basket sales. You're available. You can log in online and purchase a delivery for an Easter basket, but they also work on the social media, making sure that we're reaching out to our community and letting them know other things that are going on. So the revenues and expenses were all subject to an independent audit performed by our auditors, Badawi and Associates. The consolidated financial statements include the statement for Measure S revenues and expenses, which is also included in the Measure S report at packet page 105. So we have the whole financial statements, which now have won, multiple GFOA awards. They do a full detailed audit on those, including specifically the Measure S revenues and uses, and there was no items of note for this one. So that will really conclude our presentation for this evening. There were some comments that were included, that were provided after the packet was posted, and so we can provide those answers as well. I think primarily one of the questions was around how many staff, and so Measure S is allocated. We have 9 full-time staff. They're funded partially by Measure S, and then 10 part-time staff. Again, breaking down, there's approximately those 10 staff are really in the rec department, filling in needs, and so it could vary year to year depending on who has what classes in high school and goes off to college, those types of things. And everything else, I think the comments were really about, funding and things going forward, and really that leads into we're in budget season right now, and we really would strive to have everyone come out to find out more about what we're planning for the budget for next year and what we're anticipating for these sales taxes going forward. So I'd really look out for the budget study sessions coming out and come and participate. We'd love to hear more from you.
That's great. Thank you. Any questions or comments from the committee? The only thing I'd like to add, and you answered my one question after reading the packet, and I may have missed it, but it was the findings one way or the other by the auditor, but you addressed that. Thank you. And then just to reinforce, we're one portion of Oversight. There's also an outside independent auditor that looks at this as well. And then just as a resident, a lot of the places you described, my family or I use, and it's pretty exciting. So, whether it's driving by and watching the windows get replaced or seeing the improvements to the park and the road, I think you're doing a great job with it. So that's just my comment, being a resident here. So thank you for that. No other comments. We'll go to public comment. No one here in chambers, so we'll look to Zoom again.
Yes, thank you, Chair Savano. We do have a Zoom attendee, Arian. You have the floor.
Sorry, I don't have much of a voice, but mainly my questions were answered. Thank you for this work. It gets better every year. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us and sharing your comments. With that, we'll close public comment and see if there's a motion from the committee to approve sending a letter to the City Council stating that all program expenditures were in full compliance with the intent of Cotati Municipal Code Chapter 3.05, the Transactions and Use Tax Measure S, and followed the City Council's intent as outlined in the strategic planning goals for fiscal year 21-22. Is there a motion
I so
from the
move.
committee?
I second.
Excellent. And with a motion and a second, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And no abstentions. The motion passes 4-0. If I'm not mistaken, Mr. Clerk, if I just took your job. Good. Did I count right? Excellent. And with that, Mr. City Manager, if there's no other business, we'll adjourn the meeting.
No other business, but thank you again, everybody.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
appreciate that.
Recording.